How do you write one of animation's greatest villains inside a show that many people agree is flawed? Somehow, Centaurworld pulls it off. While the series stumbles in places, the Nowhere King keeps getting stronger with every scene. So, what did the writers get so right with him that made him a perfect villain in a flawed show? One of the first lessons about writing a perfect villain in a flawed show is something to do with tone. Now, flawed doesn't mean bad, and Centaurworld is actually a great show. It follows a character named Horse, who is, and you're not going to believe this, a warhorse who is separated from her rider. And the rider is named, well, Ryder. Horse is transported to a strange magical world filled with singing centaurs. She makes friends with some centaurs, and together they form a herd. While searching for the missing pieces of a magical key to get home, Horse and the herd uncover the truth behind the war between humans and minotaurs, leading to the tragic origins of the Nowhere King and a final battle that decides the fate of both worlds. But before we even meet this Nowhere King, Horse's journey through Centaurworld gives us one of the clearest examples of the show's biggest strengths and one of its few rough edges. Take the 6th episode of Season 1, for example. Horse just found out her tail came to life, and it talks and cracks jokes. She's stuck underground in a mole prison, crying about how strange her own body has become. It's a real gut punch of a scene. But you don't get to sit with her in that sadness, because the show swings to comedy real fast. It's almost like her friends don't even care about her feelings.
What? No! Oh, no, this isn't something to celebrate!
And that honestly is the perfect little snapshot of what some of us struggle with in Centaurworld. One second, you're crying with a character, and the next, you're watching a party get thrown for her like nothing sad even happened. But of course, this doesn't make the show bad. Turns out later on, we learn these characters use humor and chaos as a way to run from real pain. So all that whiplash actually comes from somewhere honest. However, knowing that later doesn't change how confusing it can feel in the moment. This is why the Nowhere King is just perfect. You see, long before he ever shows up in person, you hear about him through a creepy but fantastically written lullaby, sung softly by little flower centaurs. And that song sets a mood and holds it. It talks about hiding, about a kind of sleep that never lifts once his kingdom arrives, about a quiet, creeping dread, and a kind of joy he takes in watching the last bit of light leave someone's eyes. There's no joke breaking the tension here, no gag cutting the mood in half. Every line stays locked into the same chilling, hushed feeling, building and building before he ever appears on screen. That's the trick. The show earns his fear the slow way, through rumor first, then through that lullaby, then through shadows and hints, and only after all that buildup does he actually step into a scene. And this isn't some brand new idea either. On our channel, we have covered villains like Rattlesnake Jake in Rango, a villain the whole town whispers about in Fear, long before he slithers into view. There's also Fire Lord Ozai in Avatar, a threat the series builds dread around before he ever throws a single flame on screen. Delaying a reveal like that gives a villain weight. Every episode you hold him back is another episode where his legend grows a little bigger in the audience's mind. But even more importantly, while the rest of Centaurworld can throw you off balance, jumping from war and grief straight into fart jokes, the Nowhere King's scenes stay steady. He gives the audience one corner of the show where the mood never gets pulled out from under them. Even when he joins the other cast in a song, as is common with the show, the guy doesn't suddenly go soft. You can even see this during the battle inside the rift when he first fights Horse and Ryder. He calmly sings, asking why they came if they never intended to bring him the key. He complains that he has no interest in house guests trapped inside the void with him. And as he sings, you can see him actually hurting them. Then, without raising his voice or changing his rhythm, he delivers another chilling version of his lullaby, inviting them to hush now and die, little ones, before promising to send them into the middle of nowhere, where the singing and laughter have died.
Nowhere, where the singing and laughter have died.
But tone alone never made the Nowhere King unforgettable. In fact, as the movie unfolded, we started seeing another fantastic part of him in a very unlikely character. Going back to that scene where the Nowhere King fights the herd, something strange happens. So it got to a point where he had successfully kicked the butts of all the heroes, and he was this close to ending their lives for good. Then, suddenly, the portal opens and a mysterious woman, who had been appearing occasionally in the story, walks in, holding the key. But instead of Nowhere King going right back to attacking, he stops. He drops the herd he was about to crush and looks at her like he's seeing a ghost. He tells her he never stopped thinking about her, about what they could have had together. He kneels down and says he forgives her for making him what he became.
But it's okay. I forgive you.
To the herd fighting for their lives, and honestly to us watching at home, none of that made a lick of sense. Who is this woman? Why does a monster made of black sludge talk to her like an old lover? Centaurworld drops you into that moment with zero explanation, and that's exactly the point. See, this show loves holding its cards close to its chest. It hands you a mysterious woman with a past nobody explains, a key that seems to control everything about the rift, and rules about magic and dimension hopping that stay fuzzy for a long, long time. A lot of shows might treat that kind of vagueness as sloppy writing, something to get annoyed at, but here, all that mystery gets put to work, and nowhere does it pay off better than with a character named The General. Go back to Season 1, and The General barely exists. He's a name people mention here and there, a leader of the human army fighting off the Minotaurs, nothing more. Come Season 2, he steps into the spotlight properly. Ryder meets him in a stable, mistakes him for a stable hand, and gets a little annoyed with him until he reveals who he actually is.
People don't usually recognize me without my general helmet.
He's warm, funny, and encouraging, the kind of guy who lends his horse to a young soldier because he believes in her. He fights bravely against the Minotaurs, earns the trust of everyone around him, and even becomes something like a father figure to Ryder. Nothing about him screams villain or even hints at the Nowhere King. And that's the trap the show sets so carefully. Because in the finale, we learn the General and the Nowhere King came from the exact same being, split into two halves, one human and one elk. Suddenly, it makes sense why he wanted to retreat during the war, because he knew harming the Nowhere King meant harming himself. He becomes the perfect twist villain for a show such as Centaurworld because the writers treated us the way they treated Ryder. The same shock we felt when we realized that the General and the Nowhere King were one is the same shock Ryder experienced when he got stabbed by him.
I can't let you do that.
But more on the stabbing later. Do you see now why the mystery hanging over the mysterious woman and the rift matters so much? The show could have explained everything about her and the Nowhere King's history the moment they met on screen. Instead, it let the confusion sit there, unanswered for as long as it needed to, so that when the General's true nature finally came out, it landed with full force instead of feeling like something you saw coming from episode 1. The General gets to walk around in plain sight, likable and trusted, precisely because the show trained its audience to wait for answers instead of demanding them right away. And when that answer finally arrives, it recolors every scene he was ever in, turning a friendly soldier into one half of the most heartbreaking villain the show ever built. But even after all those pieces came together, the Nowhere King still had one other lesson to teach, and it changed the entire story. Centaurworld is a story packed with amazing ideas, like the massive war, two split dimensions, and ancient magical lore. However, as already established, these serious plot points often get buried under long comedic detours, making the big emotional moments feel a bit rushed near the finish line. When a show gets distracted by its own jokes, its core narrative can get lost. But that is exactly where the Nowhere King steps in to save the entire mythology of the show. You see, instead of getting lost in filler, he brings every single plot thread together into one tight, powerful narrative. He's the central point where the war, the magic, the rift, and the secret history of both worlds finally meet. In the final episode, we get to see how a perfectly written villain arc brings maximum impact with absolute storytelling efficiency. While the herd fights off the Minotaur army outside, Horse uses her magic to leap straight into the Nowhere King's mind. Inside, she meets a gentle elk he used to be before he became a monster.
How did you become this?
I don't know how to answer that.
In just one single breathtaking episode, the show reveals his entire origin story without wasting a single second. We see him working as an elk tar, keeping the rift running, falling in love with a human princess, and feeling like he could never be loved as a creature from Centaurworld. We watch him create the magic that he used to split himself into a human man and an elk. We watch the human half become the selfish general, who locks the heartbroken elk in a cramped palace dungeon for 10 long years to hide his secret. The general also goes ahead to marry the princess. Then later, once the elk escapes, he returns to the rift and uses the key to fuse humans and animals into the first Minotaurs. The dude didn't want to be alone anymore, but with every Minotaur he creates, he slowly mutates into the liquid black monster known as the Nowhere King. Soon, he had a huge army of Minotaurs, which started the war that continued for years. The princess soon realized that the general and the Nowhere King are one and decided to stop them. She breaks the magical key that started everything, but in doing so, she locks the Nowhere King in the empty space between both worlds. Basically, nowhere. The general is thrown into the human world to continue the war, while the princess finds herself in Centaurworld, where she became the mysterious woman we met earlier. As for the broken key, its pieces were scattered across both worlds, leading to Horse and the herd collecting them throughout the show. You see now how every single frame of his backstory carries weight? The Nowhere King works so well because understanding him means understanding the whole show. When he appears, the main plot moves forward at full speed. When he disappears, the story stalls out in side quests. He acts like a giant magnet pulling every important character toward their destiny. This gives us the ultimate lesson on writing a villain for a show that struggles with focus. A great villain should be the grand intersection where all the lore, history, and emotion come together. By tying your villain directly to the deepest secrets of your universe, you turn them into the beating heart of the entire story, even if the rest of the show gets lost in silly distractions. A well-paced, meaningful villain arc will keep the audience hooked until the very end. And for the Nowhere King, his end came in a way that perfectly teaches writers how to write the last moments of a modern villain. One of the hardest parts of writing a tragic villain comes at the very end. Giving that villain a sad past takes skill. Making the audience cry for them takes even more skill. But the hardest job comes after that. The writer has to decide whether the villain has earned another chance, or whether the story has reached a point where only consequences can bring the journey to a satisfying close. A lot of modern stories struggle here. We see this happen in Raya and the Last Dragon, where Namari constantly betrays the heroes, breaks promises, and causes humans in the entire world to turn into stone. Yet she gets a hero moment at the end where everyone trusts her, forgetting all the damage she caused. The audience is asked to forgive everything because the villain suffered once, but that choice weakens the plot because actions had no consequences. The Nowhere King takes a very different path. By the time Horse enters his mind during the last lullaby, you finally understand everything. Why the elk suffered, why he became angry, where the pain began, but the story also reminds us of every choice he made after that. He built an army, started a war across two worlds, created minotaurs by forcing humans and animals together, hunted horse and rider through the rift, and tried to drown them inside his own black sludge. Dude even swallowed his own followers alive to restore his strength. Those actions belong to him. That difference matters because tragedy explains behavior, it never erases responsibility.
I'd feel sorry for you. You didn't cause so much suffering and pain.
The story even seems to give him one final chance to prove whether any part of him still wants to change. You see, after Horse sees all the Nowhere King's memories, she openly admits that it's heartbreaking. She sees the lonely creature trapped beneath years of hatred. Yet before she escapes, the Nowhere King takes control again. Instead of asking for help, he tries to trap Horse inside his mind forever. He tells her that she belongs nowhere, just like him. Even after everything he has lost, he still wants someone else to share his prison. And that moment says everything. The elk shows regret, but the Nowhere King chooses possession. Horse escapes only because the last piece of the elk transforms into a doorway and asks her to finish what he never could.
Finish what I couldn't.
Then the battle outside reaches its final stage. Horse races toward Ryder and explains that ending the war means killing the general because the general and the Nowhere King share the same life. Ryder struggles to accept that idea because the general has always been a hero in her eyes. But of course, the general drives his sword through Ryder's back when she tries to kill the Nowhere King. That single action destroys any remaining illusion about his character. The general protects his own life, and the Nowhere King protects his endless war. Both halves still cling to the same selfish desire, at least until something incredible happens. The mysterious woman/princess rides into battle on a horse named Becky Apples. The general tells her that he loves her and has waited for her all these years. Earlier in the story, those words would have made her feel good or whatever. But now, his words annoyed her deeply because his actions deserve no love or redemption. So she chases the general to a cliff and lets Becky Apples kick him straight off the edge, killing him. Because the general and the Nowhere King share one life force, that same fall drags the Nowhere King down with him. When the woman climbs down afterward, she finds the general already dead and the Nowhere King barely clinging to life. But even then, in his final moment, she doesn't stop to save him. She merges him back into his original Elktar form one last time, tells him she would have loved him exactly as he was, and then turns her key into a spear and dispatches him to hell herself. That ending hurts because it gives the Elktar peace without pretending that the Nowhere King earned redemption. The story separates forgiveness from accountability. It gives the audience permission to mourn the lonely Elktar while accepting that the Nowhere King and the general had crossed too many lines to return. His punishment grows from the choices he made, and those choices shaped two worlds for years. That is the final lesson every writer should remember. Sympathy and redemption travel on two different paths. A tragic villain earns sympathy through suffering, while redemption comes through change. The Nowhere King reaches the first destination. His own choices keep the second forever out of reach. That is exactly why his ending stays with us long after the story ends. But writing a perfect villain is only half the battle, because keeping an audience coming back for years takes a completely different set of rules. If you want to know how movies turn one great idea into a lasting franchise, we broke it all down in our last video. So go check that out next.